No, he did not have grounds. This is not an insurrection or anything like a true rebellion. I mean, the instance that has happened before was in 1965 when President
Right.
Johnson in the National Guard in Alabama because Governor George Wallace made it very clear that he was going to allow the attack of civil rights, peaceful protesting civil rights workers. And it was a truly dangerous situation. That's the last time this happened, and nothing here is in comparison. In fact, the
Okay.
situation of the office, these are
So, Robert,
protesters.
if I could just jump in, if someone looks at the videos of what has happened in Los Angeles and sees some of these protesters, for example, throwing rocks at police officers, why would that not constitute a rebellion against an authority?
Yeah, a bunch of kids throwing rocks is not a rebellion. It is something that local police, and by their own statements, are perfectly fine handling. When protests, sadly, go bad, and certain elements do that, they have selective policing, prosecution, and they go get those kids or older adults that are committing violent acts like that, and they arrest them, allowing the peaceful protest to go forward. This has nothing to do with that. Local police were handling this situation just fine until Donald Trump put the National Guard in there. Really, the technical mechanism, the National Guard, he in a sense nationalized the National Guard using Title 10, and I don't think the authority extends. And if I may, the stark and shocking hypocrisy is when January 6th, 2021 happened, which was a clear attack of violent people with arms on the Capitol, he sat on his hands and did nothing. And yet, when you have some kids protesting his immigration policy, now he sends in the National Guard. That is the shocking hypocrisy going on here.
Well, of course, Gavin Newsom, Robert, is threatening to sue, and I expect that will happen at some point here when we actually see the court documents. Will let everybody know. The president, on the other hand, is threatening to, or at least suggesting it would be a good idea to arrest the governor of California. Tom Homan, the border czar, suggested as much. And Gavin Newsom responded in a pretty remarkable moment on cable news last evening. Listen to the governor of California on MSNBC.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people. They're just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes. Been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with.
Come after me, arrest me, Robert. I don't know if you'd take the governor's case, but would the administration have the grounds to do it?
I would take the governor's case in a heartbeat, and I would happily do it. In fact, I'd think about taking it pro bono, although I imagine he actually could afford to pay me. But it is an important case, and he has, I think, good grounds to say that what this is a violation of state sovereignty. And in fact, it tends to be the conservative Republicans that talk about the value of state sovereignty with federal overreach. And this is a perfect example of federal overreach. And I must say, too, when you compare this to 1965, there was a national consensus that had developed by 1965 that segregation and racial injustice was a national problem that President Johnson needed to intervene on. There is not a national consensus about Donald Trump's policies. In fact, Donald Trump does not have a mandate. He did not win. He is the duly elected president, but he didn't even win a majority. A majority is 51%, and he won 49.3% of the vote. So this is the key difference, I think, and this is what Gavin Newsom is basing his statement on.
Well, when we consider that the president still believes this is a winning issue for him, and he has far greater approval on issues like crime and immigration than others like the economy or his tariff policy for right now, Robert, it does raise the question of what happens if this continues to escalate, how it plays politically, but also the legal considerations around escalation. As we had the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, suggesting he would deploy active duty Marines from Camp Pendleton. Is there legal grounds for an active deployment of U.S. troops against, in some cases, U.S. citizens on U.S. soil? Can he use the same justification? Is there somewhere else that you would expect the administration to turn?
Well, the answer is no, and the specific statute is what's called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which specifically says that you're not allowed to use U.S. military in a law enforcement role. And that was a statute that ended Reconstruction. It was the southern states that wanted that statute passed. It is a wholly different thing when you have active military being proposed versus a National Guard, which technically is still under the state of California. They're the one who funds the National Guard, et cetera. Now, they are often incorporated into the national military in times of war or crisis, but that is not this. So this is a whole step of chest thumping that goes a step further, and it's all this kind of, making a big show. And by the way, the show is necessary for Donald Trump because if you actually look at his enforcement of immigration, he's failing. His numbers of deportations are way lower, about twice as low as what Joe Biden's numbers of deportations show. So there's all this energy being spent on these other things, but he's actually not doing the job that he promised the American people he would do.
Robert, there's a good chance this spreads to other cities or maybe continues in Los Angeles. God knows that these things can carry momentum. And we heard earlier Andrew Cuomo reacting to the idea of this taking place on the streets of New York or Chicago. If we're in for a summer like that, I know that we're talking about National Guard troops and the use of Marines and so forth. It's going to be the courts that finally handle this in the end, to adjudicate a finish here, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I'll just note that the examples you just gave, I would be shocked if this ever happens in a so-called red state. Donald Trump is doing this only in the so-called blue states, although there's protests in red states that are the same going on other places. This is selective, and this is in a way to make political points and attack political enemies and attack political kind of groups that don't like Donald Trump. It is not about his enforcing immigration law. It's about him being a national reality show, and that's how he thinks he gets to stay in power and be elected.